Director Yanes, Director McDaniel, Director Moran,
Present.
Director Nady,
Here.
Director Nelson, Director Herrera,
Here.
Director Silvera,
Present.
Director Pedroso, Director Serrano.
Here. Do I have everybody to please stand for the pledge? So the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, item 2 is public comment. Public comment is available at this point or during the meeting or also after the meeting as well. Is there anybody here who wishes to give any public comment at this time? Looking around. Okay, seeing none. Takes us to item 3, which is RWA tipping fee study.
Thanks everybody for coming. We're going to do our best to. My mom I never got the comment that I was ever not loud enough. So if you have any trouble hearing me, let me know. But I can project. I encourage any of you that are up against the wall or in the back. We built the U table to accommodate as many people as possible. I only anticipate one additional board member to show up. So please feel welcome to join us at the table, and please feel welcome to get seconds. We've got lots of food over there. And just a shout out that the cookies are homemade, and Stephanie Jackson made them, and she's made them for the board before, and they're delicious. So get one now because they'll be gone. Okay, so tonight, this is kind of a different spin on how we've done things as workshops. We've never had an evening workshop in the years that I've been with the agency, but we typically have an hour or so before a regular board meeting. But this topic was one that we wanted to make sure we were really carving out enough time to talk about the policy considerations. You know, the governing board is our policy board. And when we talk about the tip fee, which is basically the gate fee that's charged at the landfill scale house, we're talking about what that gate fee looks like into the future, that tip fee looks like into the future. There are a number of considerations on the policy end. So in terms of kind of where we are to get to this point, several years ago there was some discussion pre-pandemic, so everything's like before the pandemic or after. So just before the pandemic, the board had discussion about wanting to look at the tip fee structure, how it's calculated, what those are, and just kind of bigger, broader policy questions. And as you know, we've been working on the 1383 compliance issues as well. How are we going to process, receive organics? That was kind of a first step in the process. And closely thereafter, we were also concurrently working on what is the impact then and what does the future projection look like for the financial sustainability of the landfill, specifically in terms of the tip fee. So what we're ready to talk about tonight is to lay the foundation of kind of where we are and look at, you know, we know how far the authority has come financially, but to really now look at what are the necessary steps from here into the future to make sure that we continue on this strong financially sustainable path. And then specifically talk about a couple of structural options for the tip fee moving forward. So where we are at this point, I'll kind of tell you where we need to get to, and then we'll back out and talk about the data and all the policy considerations. We're looking at, and I caveat this with there are key assumptions built into the model and the figures we're going to be talking about. But with those in mind, and we'll talk about what they are, we're looking at needing about $39.5 million of additional revenue over the next 10 years to get our operations and to be able to invest in the capital that we need and to cover the operations costs and all the cost increases, and we can talk about what all that looks like. But that's kind of the nut we're going to be cracking here is how do we address that revenue increase through the gate fee? When do we start any tip fee increases to start collecting that revenue? And then I think the fundamental question that the board really had was, and how do we structure it? The current tip fee structure, as many of you know, has lower rates for jurisdictions that are further away from the landfills and higher rates for jurisdictions that are closer to the landfill. That has been the historical structure for a long time. We've done a lot of research and we're still unsure kind of how that came to be, but it's the structure now. And so we're gonna be looking at trying to generate that additional revenue. What would it look like over the next 10 years if we stayed with this kind of geographic structure that we had and everyone assumed a certain a percentage increase? We would look at a structure that says, what if there's just a flat increase to say, you know, the new per ton fee is this, doesn't matter where it comes from, but every jurisdiction pays that. What does that look like? And then also kind of taking those two and trying to, we call it kind of a longer on-ramp to get where we need to go, but trying to get to eventual future parity, saying that let's kind of stretch those increases out and kind of thin that out over a longer period of time to eventually get to parity, but it softens it up a little bit to where you're not just getting a heavy change right out front. So if that all sounds very foreign, it's okay. I just kind of wanted to capture what the universe of the discussion is going to look like today. There are no decisions being made. Where we are is in the model that Philip is going to talk about and the information that's going to be presented is start to introduce some of these policy concepts that the board is going to need to kind of wrap around here over the next couple of months, give us some direction on the when and how conversation. So before we start, does anyone have any kind of general questions or anything that I can help with before I turn it over to the people who really know what they're talking about? All right, okay. So James, you want to say a few words?
Thanks, Stacey. For those of you that haven't met me yet, my name is James Moore. I'm the new director of the Regional Waste Authority. Been on the job 4.5 weeks. Luckily, I've got a 25-year history here in the Central Valley. I've worked with previous directors at the RWA. I've worked with a number of landfills throughout California and throughout the United States. First thing I wanted to really do was say thank you to this board. In its history, when I thought about applying for this job, I knew the organization. I was able to look at, some of your past board meetings, look at the plans that were in place for capital projects at the two facilities, and, I came away impressed. And I can honestly say, after being here for 4.5 weeks, I'm even more impressed. We've got a great team out at the two sites in downtown, and thanks to the guidance and direction from this body, we are, operating very efficiently at the landfills. I want to give you a little background. Some of you were probably around when this happened. The last real rate study was conducted in 2006. It was 17 years ago. At that time, this board decided to implement a 29% increase in the tipping rate. At that time, the tipping rates were in the $18 to $21 range. So right now, we're at about twice that. After that rate increase went into effect, there was another increase over the next 5 years of 5% a year. So over that 6-year period, you went up almost 50%. That's what brought us to the current level. We've been at the same tipping fee level since 2011. So that's 12 years. And Philip's going to tell you, and I can tell you from my experience at landfills, going 12 years without increasing your tipping fee is just incredible. There's been some fortuitous and some things that have happened financially. The pandemic, didn't hurt us as badly as we thought. A lot of us in the solid waste industry, when COVID first came out, there was a lot of panic. We're going to see tonnages drop off. Everything's going to stop. Well, that didn't happen. We found out people still generate waste, and it has to go somewhere. Your collections agencies have to pick it up. We have to process it at the landfill. We had some, well-timed things. You were able to refinance the bonds a few years ago, drastically lowered the interest rate, and now we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have 5 more bond payments, and that'll be paid off. So we've got about a $10 million balance on the bonds, but in 5 years, that's going to be gone. And that's one of the assumptions that plays in to the rates we're going to talk about. On the other hand, we all know what's happened with inflation, supply chain issues. We run right now about a $17 to $18 million budget for the 2 landfills. When we look at, that's just operating expense and the capital projects we have going on right now. We've got 3 projects being wrapped up We built new cells out at both Billy Wright and Highway 59, and we put in the new scale house entrance area at Billy Wright. Those 3 projects are about $14 million that'll be coming off the books this year. We've got a number of other projects coming up in the future years, and we've tried to plug those numbers in kind of in a normalized fashion, rather than having spikes and peaks as projects happen. And again, where Stacy said, we're looking at about that 39.5 million over 10 years. So we're looking at trying to smooth that out as much as we can. Think there was anything else on, talking about inflation. One of our largest costs at the landfill is our equipment, our compactors, our dozers. We have a new compactor on order. Supposedly, we're being told it's going to be here in June. We paid for that. Well, we ordered it almost 2 years ago. The last one we bought was $1.2 million. This one was 1.8. So now we're 2 years down the road. What we're hearing from the manufacturer is if we were to buy a compactor today, it's probably above $2 million. And we're looking at about a 18 to 24 month delivery time. So, that's just some of the things we're looking at in trying to forecast where do we need to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when we get the bonds paid off, when the current importation authorization expires, how is that going to affect what we're looking at? I'll tell you honestly, from my standpoint, we're not going to wait another 10 years to come back and talk about tipping fees. We're probably going to be back in about 3 years, because we'll see how those conditions have changed and what can we do at that point. Honestly, our goal would be that we've been able to operate efficiently. If we continue the importation for the current period of time, maybe we hit a point where whatever rate increase has been approved or authorized, perhaps we can defer those somewhere. But again, we're going to come back and look at this on a more frequent basis so that we can report back to you, get some guidance, and go from there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Philip, and he's got some graphs that really, I think, express what we're trying to get across tonight. So, thank you.
And if I could, James, and you might have said this, but I just want to just kind of reiterate that the idea of coming back and having more discussion in a few years is because the 2 real big items that are kind of out there for the board to tackle in the next few is, once we get the bond debt paid off, do we continue to import, and at what rate do we continue to import waste? And the trajectory of the expansion of the Billy Wright landfill, which will be a huge factor in the decision on importation. So those 2 are out in the 27, 28 realm. So while we're looking long-term, those are huge factors that could really, we want the opportunity to be able to come back again at that time when the board's grappling with those policies, and to keep this part of that part of the conversation. So I think you said that, but just want to add.
So I know a lot of you because I've been in front of this board and I've been your individual councils and boards, but for those of you who don't, my name is Philip Manalfi. I'm the Senior Project Manager at HF&H. I've been working with the authority since 2019, SB 1383 planning and the landfill tip fee study, but been in the industry about 14 years and don't want the tie fool you. I spend as much of my time in facilities, at composting, landfills, and everything else. So I'm really in the operational leads, and I've been helping with some of the decisions that have been made over the past couple of years. In terms of the presentation, I'm going to provide a little bit more background. James and Stacy did a great job. But I want to talk about some of the decisions we've made over the past couple of years, how we got to the landfill tip fee study. Then I want to give some of the results, dive into the numbers. I know a lot of you will be interested in that. And finally, we'll give a couple examples of rate change scenarios. Stacy had mentioned there's a couple approaches. Either you could raise everything by a percentage, you could create parity, you could phase it in over time. So we have a couple of those scenarios. And they're by no means set in stone. The model was designed with actually has thousands of inputs. So as we get your feedback and we start wrestling with decisions like, do we continue import, do we slow it down, do we expand the landfills, all that's built in. So we can take the feedback, run other scenarios, it's set up to evaluate on a perpetual basis or every few years to come back as you make these policy decisions. So I'm sure most of you have heard of 1383. I'll be brief about it. It's a shared responsibility bill technically, but we all know that it's falling upon jurisdictions like yourselves to comply. And as far as the authority's role right now, it's essentially around processing of organic waste, the landfill portion, moving the recyclables. There's going to be a level of education and outreach. As we allow people to self-haul and bring materials to the landfill, it's incumbent upon them to separate. So there'll be some signage, but that's kind of minimal. And they also assist with all the record keeping at the JPA level. So they aggregate all your data, assist with the Cal Recycle deviation, and everything like that. We haven't factored the educational costs or the records or reporting into any of the fees. We're assuming that can maintain the status quo. So we're really focused on what do we need at the landfill. So in 2019, the board directed the RWA to do a study on 1383. What do we need to do to comply with this legislation? What do the individual member agencies need to do to comply? And we came up with action plans. One of the first things we did is, what's the cheapest solution? Where can we take organic waste? How can we change the recyclables contract? What can we do to mitigate the cost impacts that we know are coming? Obviously, processing recyclables and organics is far more expensive. We looked around for 150 miles, couldn't find any solutions. So we said, how can we solve this organics? This is one piece of a much larger puzzle that the RWA is playing. And as we decided, it was probably a better idea to go to an RFP and see what's out there rather than doing it ourselves. I've been going to all the composting facilities and I've seen major missteps in capital investments among pretty much all of the hauling and processing community. And as you look around at the rates that were proposed by a lot of people and at the rates that other jurisdictions are paying, you can see that a lot of these people have bought machinery to pre-process things that didn't work out, so they're on version number 3 or 4. It's really, for a period of years, was an unfunded science experiment. People were trying to figure out what to do with organics. So we decided, we're not in the organics business, we can get you a much better deal, and we have people who can broker all that, so we're getting out of that. That's not something we're looking at doing ourselves and expanding the composting at Highway 59. So we presented that plan to the board, and they directed us to move forward with that RFP. So we're getting out of the organics business, and along that, they also directed us to do a landfill tip fee study. How is this? And we realized that the organics piece is really a huge factor in the landfill tip fee study. If we couldn't get a good deal from a third party, or we couldn't find someone to process for us, that would obviously impact our overhead, the cost of processing, and everything else. So that's why it took from 21 to 23, we were waiting on all the pieces to fall in line on that front, so we could be more conservative and really minimize all the costs and estimates around what would be needed for enhancements at the site. So really the goals of the tip fee were, one was to determine the overall health of the landfill system. As James alluded to, there hasn't been a rate increase in over a decade. So we wanted to see how is that working. And then we also wanted to evaluate the impacts of normalizing the gate rate among different member agencies. That was a request of the board. They wanted to know, what does it look like if we were to try to make them all the same? Or how did we get to the original spacing of the different gate rates? So here's for the results.
That's gonna be hard to see.
This is gonna be hard to see. So I'll use my pointer and I'll explain. The green line here is your revenue. Your reserve funds. That's your projected reserve fund balance, the green line. The red line is your closure and post-closure liabilities, which you're required to have by regulations, which are currently significantly underfunded. And the yellow line is the target reserve balance. So obviously you don't just want to put aside money for closure and post-closure. There's all sorts of other costs. You're going to have money set aside for your CIP projects. Yes?
Yeah, are these slides available?
Yeah, I can't see that at all.
Yeah. I mean, I went to the agenda, it's not linked.
Yeah.
How can we get this out? Let me,
Is that on your website, or is it on an email, or just a
Yeah.
PDF on the computer?
it's on his computer.
Can you email us all the PDF?
Concern.
Could you-
I have to learn to do it.
Okay, do you
No.
have them?
I don't have those.
Well, I guess actually it's a couple of
Should have brought a pair of binoculars or something.
them. I know. We could all sit at that front table up there.
Yeah.
I can see from here.
Presentation mode.
Yeah.
Did it work?
Yeah, when you have this one, there it works.
This one? No?
Yeah, that's better.
Oh yeah, it's much bigger, but still not big enough.
Yeah.
That's okay, keep going. I'll be okay.
So basically, we currently have an overall fund balance of $50 million right now. As I said, we haven't funded our closure and post-closure, but we have a little bit of excess fund balance. Can you zoom out? A little bit, we'll get into more detail on what's happening. But over time, essentially, we're gonna have less than $0 by 2031, 2032.
That's assuming no rate increase.
Assuming no rate increases, assuming the importation stops at the end of the current contracts. We don't know what those contracts will look like or what the market. So, and I'm gonna go through a bit of the detail of this for the next 5 minutes, and then we can go back and go slide by slide for questions. But I think I've anticipated a few of the questions, so I'll try to answer a few of those.
Philip, will you just, for that people know at least what's on your, what you're looking at in terms of your axis and your, what are your data
Yeah, so the
points?
x-axis is the fund balance in millions, and the y-axis is fund balance in million, and the x-axis is time. So over time, we're essentially, every year, we're losing money at a significant rate without increasing costs. And our fund balance targets are increasing, right? As we fill up the landfill, we need to put away money for closure and post-closure. That's a regulatory requirement. And we also have CIP expenses, fleet replacement, things like that. So this is our annual cash flow, similar axis. You have millions of dollars on the left going over time. And you can see that the line across is 0. You're probably wondering what that spike is right now. And that's capital investment and fleet replacement. As James had mentioned, we weren't in a great financial situation years ago, and rates haven't increased. So the two mechanisms that were used to swell the fund balance and make us more financially stable so we weren't on the verge of insolvency were deferring capital investment, and whether it's fleet, buildings, roads, things like that, and also import. But import, while it brings in money, it fills up airspace and requires more capital investment. We need more cell expansion, more closure, more post-closure, and all of those expenses to fund it. We have a chart here, which is a little hard to see. But this is just another way of telling the same story. The bars are your current expenditures, and that line is your revenue. So you can see in most years, your expenditures are exceeding your revenues. I'll go into a little more detail on that in the next slide. This is telling the same story, except it's about your annual expenses. The light green, that trend line, is just the slow growth of your operational costs. The dark green parts of the bar, that's going to be your capital expenses and your debt service. And again, you're probably wondering why there's a huge spike, that $32.7 million. Because typically you want to expand, you want to kind of spread your expenses across, multiple years. But in this case, a lot of capital projects were deferred over the years. That's just the reality of the situation, and all the import that we were doing to accrue money resulted in we need capital investment and cell expansion. So what are some of those capital improvements? The Highway 59 South Compost Road, obviously, yep.
Could you go back one slide?
Yeah.
Is the bond payment eliminated out?
Yes, the bond payment is eliminated at the end of the term.
Which is 2028?
27. 27.
27 is the last
Correct. That also coincides with the stopping of import at Billy Wright, and then the following year we have a halting of import at Highway 59. Not necessarily the halting, but the expiring of the current contracts, and we don't know what the new ones would look like. Okay. So like I was mentioning, we have the South Compost Road. We have the cell closures. We just closed a cell and built a new one, but we also know at the current import rates we need additional cell expansion. It also has a relocation of the HHW facility, maintenance shop, and recyclables pad that's currently in the area we call Valley for a Valley Fill. So that's all going to be moved over. So it's going to minimize the traffic, create operational efficiency and safety around the composting facility, but also give us more space to eventually fill up airspace and create new cells. It does include the admin building, which is also part of that master relocation plan of the whole site. We're going to do a lot of that all at one time versus trying to move some stuff, remove it again years later, trying to set up the site in an efficient manner that can serve the community for years to come. There's also landfill gas monitoring and flare upgrades that are required. That's all regulatory requirements. The Billy Wright Scale House, that improvement, that helps create obviously traffic flow. Right now, you can go out there and it's backed up sometimes pretty significantly due to the import. And then the cell expansion as well. Since we are importing, we're going to need to expand that. We're going to need to expand that facility to allow for further tonnage, not necessarily for import, but we're going to need it for the residents and users on the west side communities. Ultimately, it could be used for more import, and that's a decision that we'll be looking for from the board over time. Here's some of the key assumptions. The current landfill debt service ends in 26, 27. Sorry, I had that wrong. I thought it was 27. It doesn't account for hiring additional employees. We put in the basic COLA wage increases. We weren't assuming 9% like this year's inflation. It was the basic, last 10-year average that we've had, which includes a couple years of zero, mostly around 3.5%. The closure estimates were actually last completed in 2009 and 2013, which predates all of the import we're doing. Also predates a lot of the costs that James was alluding to around equipment and then just closure and post-closure and monitoring, all that's increasing. So at some point it's recommended that we reevaluate the closure and post-closure costs. At this point it's actually a little beneficial probably in terms of your closure, post-closure liability to keep them low. But ultimately, you're going to want to know what those costs are, so that way you can plan for them in the future. Because once you run out of airspace, there's going to be no more revenue to fund the closure, post-closure, and all those liabilities, and methane monitoring, and all that stuff that comes with it. It does include population growth. There's a minor reduction for 1383, less than a percentage of a ton, basically, for most jurisdictions. That's phased in based on all of your contracting agreements. Some people have 1383 compliant programs, so their reduction might start a little sooner. Some people haven't finalized their contract, so those reductions will be years out. But we're not projecting a 75% organics recovery rate. We're projecting a couple percent at best, which is actually offset by the population growth and a couple other factors. We do expect there will be a minor recession in the next 10 years. Every 10 years we have some form of a dip. If you look at the history of solid waste landfill deposits, but again, that's less than a percent. It's very minor. We don't know what year that'll happen, but as the economy, goes down, right now we have huge consumer debt. The housing markets aren't necessarily looking great everywhere. People aren't buying. So at some point there will be a recession. And as you're projecting long-term closure and post-closure costs over 50 years, it doesn't matter if you miss by a year or two. Really, it just helps you know when your liability is going to hit and when do we need money. And the biggest key assumption now is probably that import tonnage will halt at the end of the currently contracted period. And that's a decision that really has a huge impact on that fund balance trend line that you see, that downward line. If you continue import, that's going to go up, but it's also going to eat away your airspace. So in the future, you may have significantly higher tip fees if you have to take the tonnage elsewhere. So here's a couple example rate scenarios. We had talked about one of the decisions we wanted to, actually before I go further, does anyone have any questions about kind of assumptions or how the model was built before I get into some of the potential other policy decisions that we'll be looking for? Yeah.
Yeah, what percentage of our waste is import currently?
3 million tons out of.
It's about 30% right now.
I'm just going back to those other slides of the expenses. So if we're gonna lose 30% of our product coming in, why do the expenses continue to increase? And we have also lose the $2.5 million bond payment.
The issue with the importation is we've been able to take advantage of incremental efficiency. We need the same amount of equipment, the same number of bodies on site, the same number of people at the scale house. There are, scales where we have the minimum equipment people, we can handle, say, I'm just gonna throw out a number, 1,500 tons a day. With that same people and equipment, we can actually stretch to, say, 1,900 tons a day. Now, if we go somewhere beyond that, we have to add people and equipment. If we take out those 400 tons a day, we still need the same pieces of equipment and then the same people. Some of our, maybe fuel cost goes down a little bit, but just stopping the importation completely only has a minor effect on our expenses, but it has a major effect on our revenue. Does that make sense?
The primary cost associated would be the closure and post-closure. You can expand a little faster and close a little faster, but like he was saying, same capital, same scale, same people sitting there for the most part. It just stretches your cell expansion by about 50%. Okay. Any other questions on anyone? We can always go back to it. So we're gonna put a disclaimer here. There's infinite adjustments and scenarios we can run. We're seeking feedback from you on how we can fill the gaps. And if you want to see a scenario where we continue import at 50% of the current rate, or if we extend it out a little further, we can run all of those scenarios. This is just for example purposes only, and based on the current state. But if you decide we want to import at 50% right now, and we can try to get the contracts, and we could run a model to see what that would look like. And we'll be presenting more. We're gonna have a board workshop when we come back. one right now. I believe it's scheduled for next month. But you can always run any of the scenarios you want or change the variables as you see fit. So the first scenario is basically we keep the geographic status quo. Everyone has their individual rates. So Atwater is still going to pay $37.48 per ton at the gate. Los Banos is still going to pay $40.21 at the gate. You continue your gate rate, that differential between the agencies, but we do a 5.25% increase every year. Or you could do it 1 year, you could do it over 5, you could do it over 10. This example shows what it would be like over 5 years. And you can see that the green trend line is doing much better. We're not hitting $0 by 2031. You know, we'll still be below our target, but we'll have enough to fund closure and post-closure. It's a much healthier, I mean, perfectly healthy situation with no import. That green line would meet the yellow line and run parallel. But that's assuming no imports. There's a couple different scenarios. The second option that could be explored is, and this one isn't based on current scenarios, it's very complex and takes huge algebra and goal-seek formulas. So we'll run this upon direction and we can build it out, but for cost efficiency, we weren't going to build out this whole really complex model without any direction. But this would be immediate geographic parity. So everyone pays the same rate. You do one rate increase, it's going to be different for different agencies, but then everyone would pay the same gate. So I apologize, this is mislabeled. So this last column will be your difference. So some cities could get as little as a $6 increase, while others are getting 14 because they're further away, they have a lower rate now. The final scenario that we're presenting is parity in 5 years. And again, this could be 10 years, it could be 7 years, you could 3 years, whatever. It's definitely set up flexible enough to run those scenarios. And this would allow you to phase in the rates over time and eventually get everyone to paying the same gate fee. So minimize your rate impacts next year and allow people to plan for it more in budgets like this. So with that, we'll open it up to see if anyone has any more questions. Before we move to the next portion.
If you could go back to this. Yeah. The second one, I think.
Yeah.
That's okay, so just to kind of go back to, I think that one of the fundamental questions that will need to be answered again, doesn't have to be today, but we're seeking feedback, is we're showing examples of using the geographic structure that we have as the foundation on which an increase would be applied, or if there's an interest in looking at trying to get to that parity stage where the fee across the jurisdictions becomes the same, and having that growth be applied to each jurisdiction differently until we achieve that. So I think the geographic structure versus everyone pays the same rate structure, that is a fundamental policy question of this board that we're just starting today to kind of chip away at. But I just want to highlight that as that's going to be a critical piece to how we move forward, how this board decides to move forward.
I guess I would add, when we say geographic, it's not necessarily geographic. We went back, talked to the old consultants, they couldn't present a model. We ran sensitivity analysis around your distance from your city center to the landfills, and there was some variance there. It wasn't truly what the geographic difference would be between two.
Well, how about then locale specific?
Yeah, locale specific.
Something
It might be a better term.
Yeah,
for us.
locale specific. And I think, is it fair to say also that within the industry, it's an odd model to be locale specific as opposed to either, I think maybe more commonly either a flat rate, that parity concept, or even the reverse of what we have where higher volume generators have lower rates and lower volume generators have higher rates, which is effectively the opposite of what we have. So
the three common ones we see, those are two of them, is everyone pays the same or you get a volume discount. And the third one is just individual negotiations between the landfill system and member users of the landfill system. Okay?
I'm not a board member, but I would like to go, since the city is, I think, paying all the higher ticket fees, and I know we're a major customer, I would like to see some parity across the board, so everybody pays the same fee. If not, also I would think as one of the biggest customers, we probably should be getting a discount. That's what I would put forward. That's just to see if it's that. I think right now we pay the highest rate, and I know we're the closest part of the landfill, but I would like to see some, maybe a flat rate. That'd be the most equitable rate.
Thanks, Ken.
Do you think that this, I'm guessing this rate kind of structure was in place when it used to be the county dump before it went over to the RWA?
Yeah, from the history, from what I have learned from people who came before me, was that it was the rate structure when it was with the county, and that there was consideration to the cost of hauling, which, so if we're not in the hauling business, so the jurisdictions are you're negotiating your hauling contracts, but it was this taken into consideration that Dos Palace is gonna pay a higher likely for their hauling to the facility than the city of Merced would, or Las Banas would. So it was trying to say out the door with your hauling contracts and your disposal costs, there's parity there. But for under the house of RWA and the functions that we have, we're not involved in the hauling. So if you looked at just the operations that we are responsible for, the rate is a bit wonky, because we're not involved and we're not in the hauling, and that's really in between. But that's the thought process, and I think it was developed while it was under the county, through the board.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna ask for maybe two things to be looked at in the future.
Sure.
One would be what are the hauling costs for all the jurisdictions? And then what would it look like if RWA's got into the hauling business?
Those are both great questions, and we'll
You
have
just
to
went
evaluate
straight
the
there.
time horizon.
Well, it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but RWA, staff, it's RWA. But for your board,
Yeah.
we're not RWA, we're our jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And so we're more in tune with the citizens and what is best for them versus what makes sense for
Yeah.
RWA.
We'll have to look at a time horizon and come back to you on that, because everyone's at a different contracting point right now. A couple of people have already signed new agreements. Livingston and Atwater are out to bid right now. Atwater's gonna give someone a new contract, I believe, on Monday. The city has municipal hauling, so we may have to have a couple conversations and come up with a time horizon on what that would look like.
I would say that it probably makes better sense to me that we would have an equal percentage increase across rather than the same
Back to the
adjustment for everybody.
The 5 1/4.
Yeah,
So keep the structure, but have the increase be
even,
So
even.
that would keep everybody at different rates
yeah.
ongoing.
Well, I think that, like I said, some commuters are, like I said, the transportation is a lot farther. But then, like I said, if we have a different, where RW is in charge of transportation, that'd be different, right? But right now, smaller communities, smaller cities are farther away. City of Merced is closer. Los Banos is closer to that landfill over there. So smaller communities are having to, like I said, and they're lower income. That's my thought. The bigger cities, tend to have better income-wise in its residents. So that's my feeling.
To counter that also, the city of Merced, yes, we might be closer, but our volume, we might be driving a whole component, something coming, maybe one load from Granada or something, as opposed to city, having 100 loads going to the landfill. So if we're talking about fuel, I mean, we need to look at that also.
Yeah, but aren't we really looking at it, I get it, by sheer nature, you have more volume, but you're figuring it back to a per customer rate. So you're getting economies of scale because you're making 100 loads, but you're dividing that 100 loads by how many thousands of customers versus a Dos Palace or a Gustine who might be only making 2 loads, but they're only dividing that 2 loads by 50 customers or 100 customers. So, I mean, I get it. I think, but for me, there was a reason why that rate was put into place that way. I don't know which scenario I like. I gotta think about it for a while. But one that I don't like is just immediately setting everybody at even and then moving forward. If you're going to change it to where we all come out at a rate at the end, then that's the same. I think that minimally for these smaller jurisdictions, they're gonna have to prepare for that.
That would be the third option.
and taking in that phased rate. But I'm just gonna tell you, it's not gonna be an easy discussion. I mean, I represent one that pays the highest, the one that the county, my folks that live in the unincorporated areas that pays the middle, and my city of Dos Palace who pays one of the cheaper rates. I mean, it's really kind of, it's tough because, and I get it, you know, the city of Los Banos is creating, in my jurisdiction, or my district, they're creating the most volume, right? But, so that leads me to my next question is, what are the import rates, the imported trash? I surely hope that they're not paying less than what our customers who pay the taxes are paying.
They are, based on the importation direction we got from the board. The key of getting that, so while, I want to say while we're dependent on, but while we are utilizing importation to prevent, to keep us from having to do previous rate increases and to pay off the bond debt and to, you know, keep everything moving, we have to be competitive. So it has to make financial sense for those haulers to bring the material over to us. And so if we are charging them the same as the closest place that they can go to, they'll go there, and then we have no revenue. So the board, the agreement that we have in place has them at a lower rate, and that agreement goes through 27, 28.
And that's all, that's one hauler that brings in it all?
No, we've actually got about 12 right now.
There's a rate.
There's two primary ones, I believe, that are the majority of the feedstock, and those are the ones that are.
And so all of the 12 are still under that same agreement, the 27?
They each have individual agreements, but
Through 27, 28?
well, no, there are actually agreements in this, in July 1st, but when we're talking about, there is a board action that gives us the authority to bring in import up until 2027, 28.
Yeah.
So we renegotiate those contracts with those haulers, and we have, right now, we have them in July 1st because we were waiting to hear what we were gonna do with the rate increases. We wanted, you know, if we were gonna start a rate increase for everyone on July 1st, we didn't want to be in the middle of a contract. So right now, all our contracts are in for July 1st.
So the item that came to the board, I think it's come through the board twice, has been, I think, 5 to 7 year chunks of authorization for us to go into contract with haulers interested in importing their waste, and gave us a range that we would be able to go into those agreements to basically attract the importation material, because it's been kind of a cornerstone of the financial recovery with getting us over our debt cover, I mean, our bond payment, and also stabilizing our rate so that we weren't needing a rate increase previously. And so this last time we went to the board, I think it was 2 years ago, I have to double check, the decision that was made was to keep that importation agreement, or give us the flexibility to import at a certain rate over a certain amount until we finished the last bond payment, and then the board will decide, okay, do we, you know, one scenario at that time could be, so I say that to say is that if the board I mean, it is a board decision, if there was a need to revisit it, but losing importation revenue is going to compound the problem we're dealing with, especially between now and the bond payment being paid off. But once the bond debt's paid off and we're not relying on that revenue for importation, because it's finicky. I mean, if they can get a cheaper place, they're gonna go somewhere cheaper, and then we don't get any of the revenue. But once that point comes, the board may say, okay, we're gonna charge twice the rate for importation, but take in half the waste. So we'll still get some waste, but we're not going to use our airspace so fast. We'll be in a position to be able to dictate the terms a little bit more. The board can still dictate those terms, but it's going to, the concern is that it would impede the competitiveness of us being able to be an attractive location for imported waste.
And it goes back to that incremental efficiency. You know, it's not costing us any more in equipment or personnel to handle that additional tonnage right now.
Yeah, I totally get that.
So that's where
the concern is that, God willing, when I'm still here 30 years from now, I still want to have landfills on Billy Wright Road to take the trash to, versus, I get the efficiencies, but we're taking up that airspace, and who knows, crazy California, they might just say, you know what, we're not permitting no new landfills, period. So now everything, the whole world, I mean, look at 1383, the biggest joke ever. When you talk about, we're assuming that we're gonna lose 1% of our space or intake, 1% on 1383, and the, just, I don't even know how much money it's gonna cost our residents for this nonsense that comes out of Sacramento, but, so I get it, I think it's a real struggle, but I'm just gonna tell you, I'm gonna put it out there. I totally get that we need to get to 27, 28 to pay off our bond payments, but after that, I will not, I'm only one person, will not entertain anything that doesn't say unless you want to import to our landfill, you're paying double what our taxpayers are paying here. And then, you know what, some other landfill's gonna get filled up, and they're gonna get closed, and they're not gonna have an option, and at that point, then we might, if we're gonna give up airspace, it's gonna cost, at least to the point that when we have to go try to figure out how to expand Billy Wright, or potentially expand 59 at someday, that we're not having to put it on the taxpayers to all by themselves, our county taxpayers, to do it, that we're saying, well, listen, no, you big metropolitan areas, because you don't have nowhere to put it, and you wanna come take advantage of rural California, that we're gonna say, no, you gotta pay your fair share. That's kind of my thoughts on it. I know that's a discussion for later down the road, but.
How much is imported right now?
30%.
30%.
Last year, calendar year 2022 was about 320,000 tons. So again, it's about a third of our revenue.
And Director Silvera, I will say that I don't think that what we heard from you is no, I mean, we talk about that too. We need to get our bond paid off. We see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then it's a whole different discussion on importation, and the board will have that discussion, and that's why, when we were working through these, there's just an infinite number of ways that we can be talking about this. One of the things I didn't mention is, we also have to say the win factor is, from the model, it could be July 1, but recognizing that's around the corner, could be next July 1, but it's still the same amount over the same, now it's just 1 year shorter, right? There could be a take status quo for the next fiscal year for 1 year. Let's continue the discussion of what the longer term strategy looks like. And at least that we don't lose that time that we could be making incremental progress. But for example, as we talked about the hybrid approach, which is the scenario 3, which it sounds like those are the two we're really talking about. Like keep the existing one, so scenario 1, keeping the existing structure and have a flat increase over, that everyone kind of feels the same increase, or the 3, which is let's get to parity eventually, but let's kind of do a longer on-ramp to get there and figure that out. So if we're looking at, and if I'm mistaken, if anyone's like, let's just drop the hammer now and go straight to the parity, I don't think we wanted to show what that would look like, but it's not really all that great. But if you look at 3, what would be, what is, I think, good with a model like this, where you're looking at like slow rolling it out over years, is that it gives that ability to say, okay, once we're done with importation, we know where we are on the Billy Wright expansion. We've got a couple of years of 1383 under us. Maybe we don't need that, whatever it is, a 5% this year. Maybe we don't need to implement that increase this year because those assumptions that are built in have changed. So it gives you that kind of real, those milestone moments to check in and say, is this still the path we're on, or maybe we don't need to implement an increase as aggressively? You can change with how the assumptions change.
Is the justification for the differential rate is simply just distance from the facilities?
It appears it was that at some point in time.
And that's how it was explained to me by my predecessor. Actually, it was Margie who was here, I think, at that time. But was that it was a way to take into account that the hauling costs are presumed to be higher the further you are.
What is that? So what does it do, Stacey? What does it do to, if you signed a contract that your Merced does their own, but the city of Los Angeles signed a contract with a hauler, and then now rates change, do they have to go back out to a 218 to change those rates?
Yeah. I would defer to your attorneys on that every day.
It's gonna
There's a lot of litigation going on surrounding fees and Prop 280.
Was it on a dollar?
Either way, I guess it's fine, but that just goes to the scenario of, I appreciate that looking at it and wanting to maybe say 1 year you only want to do a 3.5 versus a 5.5. I think you make the decision and you go with it, and then at the end of the 5 years, you adjust from there, because I think that just, for our smaller jurisdictions, if it's this change all the time, every year it's 5, it's 3.5, I think that becomes probably burdensome for them.
One stopgap for a potential liability is when you do the Prop 218 for 5 years, you can use example rate calculations and you use a high percentage, say, your example is an increase of 20%. And as long as it comes in under that, you don't have to redo the Prop 218. And we do have quite a few jurisdictions that are renegotiating their contracts right now. So it could be, the next few years, good timing to do a high Prop 218, assuming that we're gonna come in under it, but it buys you the flexibility for future years.
That's up to the consultant that you have do your 218.
And your
That's not up to the
attorneys.
city.
Yeah, exactly.
That's up to the consultant, and you put your faith in that consultant that he's gonna have enough cushion built in there to cover the cost, because we're not allowed to make money on our waste.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
And so for Gustine, we just negotiated rates and just went through that process with our people and got to hear all the complaints in the full council chambers, just like we all go through when there's rate increases. And so we've told them what it's gonna be for the next 3 years or 5 years. Well, we can't next year come back to them and say, well, it's going up another 10%.
Just a time code, sorry.
Fixed income people can't afford it, for one thing.
Just a time check, we're about an hour in. How we doing on?
Oh, we're good. This
Everything we
is
might
it.
present.
We're ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
This is
So
all.
I would just ask, whatever we do, it's a phased in,
Yeah.
whatever we do. I'm not
Yeah.
saying to do this or do that. I'm just
And
asking, give
One thing we
everybody
wanted
time.
to do is to get the board's decision on that structure. Are we going to keep this? Are we going to parity? And then we've got these 5-year models, but we'd like to put it out to 10 years.
We
So
can-
everybody can see, hey, over the next 10 years, these are our ideas of where we're at, and then come back in 3 to 5 years and relook at them. Do we continue on with this? So everyone can project, for the next 10 years, this is what we think the rates are going to be, but if we need to pull back, we can. So we want to give you as much leeway, not just, hey, here's the next 3 years, here's the next 5 years, but here's the next 10 years. This is what we're thinking. The rates are going to be needed because.
Our fear is if we do nothing, we have no choice. in it.
Oh, we have to do something.
Exactly,
Yeah.
so it's, then we'd be forced to rip off a band.
I'm sorry, Director Moran, I'll just say that the other thing is that, this can start to feel really overwhelming, but I think, we talked this afternoon, it was, before this meeting this afternoon, and said, we knew that after 12 years of no increases and deferring capital and kind of building out of some financial turmoil, that the day was going to be here. And so we're actually in the right place now that we're looking ahead and saying, okay, what is our strategy going to be to not arrive where we once were, and to not just have it drop like a ton of bricks, but to actually, with this model and having the ability to kind of put in different inputs and see how that would look. What we really want and what we're trying to write down here are the things like, we recognize too. I mean, we saw you guys going through your processes. We have this going on. We have 1383 is hearing from you, like whatever we do, we need it to have that slow rollout, because this is gonna be an impact to everybody. I mean, the 1383 is an impact to everybody. But also hearing, from other directors talking about, for our smaller jurisdictions, also having that transparency of knowing what knowing what the next 5 years are gonna look like is also important, because they need to budget that process. And, so this is really valuable for us. The intention of what we wanna do after this is then go with what we've heard and work with it, as Kyle just said, also, pull that out into 10 years and see what it looks like. Bring back a more refined, some more refined data for you to look at that is specific to what we're talking about here. So time is good for as far as we're concerned. We're here to listen to you guys. And I also wanted to apologize to the chair, because I've just been sitting here running the meeting like it's, my show. So sorry, I'm just calling on people. So if I could.
Less for me to do.
Okay, if I could, Director Moran, it's yours.
So a couple of things that I would like to see the next time would be, definitely the 10-year graph. And are all those different scenarios, are they would the end result be the same as the graph that you were showing earlier? Well,
They could or they could, that's gonna be dependent on your direction, so.
so like for me, being a visual kind of person, I would like to have a scenario and then a graph.
Okay.
Kind of
Yeah,
seeing,
we can do that.
and then another scenario, and then the other thing would be, to kind of go back on what Scott said, I would like to see something on, without having to consider that 30% of
Import.
import, like, we need to be
Self-sufficient?
sufficient, and then if we have some, then by all means, that's extra, but that's,
All our graphs that you've seen
They
are,
already include the
they
stoppage.
include
of
stoppage of import. So
Okay.
27, 28, you'll see it drop off at 27 and 28. That's because we've taken the import out. So that's why there's this kind of a bigger drop there.
This change in the
So
trajectory.
we've already
is the
kind of
first-
factored that, and all the ones we bring to you, we'll continue with that.
Good.
Something we discussed is we should have that green line more parallel over the next 10 years without import.
okay,
And then if the board at some point decides to continue doing import or something, then that may adjust whether we need to do that rate increase that we had scheduled. But that's a later discussion. But we thought over the next 10 years, it should just be based off our rates, not off import, just what do we need to operate.
and then I'm assuming that within those calculations, you have already calculated like equipment in 2
Yeah.
years, 4 years, or whatever.
Everything.
And we've been pretty conservative on those estimates. We're not projecting the 9% inflation we had last year. We're looking at a more long-term horizon. Over the last decade, it's been 3.5%.
Thank you.
And for the import, to kind of get to what Director Silvera was talking about, not being able to dictate, well, if we're gonna import your material, there's gonna be a much higher cost to it. To get into that position, we have to be financially sustainable without the revenue. So, we want to be able to have that as a bonus if it occurs, but not have to be dependent on it to where we have to have rates lower than what we would really like to charge just because we need to be competitive, so.
Mr. Chair, Josh has been over here, you can't see him, he's trying to get. Yeah,
I'm failing at my job, sorry, Josh, sorry, Director Pedrosa.
No, Serato, it's not like you had a late meeting last night or. So with this, okay, I have two questions, and I think this is more procedural before anything else. But before our next meeting, it really, I'll just be honest, it was frustrating not to have this information beforehand, because just getting this fed to us right away, it's like, whoa, what the heck? And I know we've gone over it before, but at least it helps having this information to look at and go through it beforehand helps. So in regards to this status quo, okay, so you have the line right here, right, on the bar graph, or I'm sorry, on this line. Okay, yeah, the green line is
That's your current fund balance.
okay, and then you want the red line,
The red line's your closure, post-closure liability, so that's the minimum you're gonna be required to have to pay for closure, post-closure.
Okay, so which lines are you talking about that you want to be
You want the green line, this highest one parallel with, and basically you want them to meet and be parallel.
The
These
yellow
top
line,
two,
the middle line.
The dotted and the green, you want those to be parallel over time.
Okay,
Because that's gonna mean we fill closure, post-closure, and we have enough to cover our capital projects and our fleet replacement. And
closure of the bond.
the landfill.
Closure of the landfills, et cetera.
We're required to have a closure fund, because once we get
Oh, okay,
max airspace, we still have to maintain that.
Got it. Okay, so then so this is where we're at now, and that's with this rate increase?
That's
Do we
with
have-
5.25% for the next 5 years.
And do we have the other one, the other graph?
We haven't built those, and I don't want to get too academic about this, but either you have to hack into the model and make it so cumbersome that you can't run multiple scenarios, or you have to put in really complex formulas and goal seeds.
These
We didn't
numbers are
want to
made
build
up.
that without direction, because it's a waste of time.
Yeah, these numbers are made up because to develop the system to bring everybody up to parity, there's a lot of work needs to be done. And so before we went to do that, we wanted to see if that was even something the board wanted to do. And so, but this was just a representation of,
An example purpose.
to see, how that might look. So, each city may go up $2 or $12 or $16. So just a visual representation of what that might look like.
And we're here to go on
forward
the
that.
next meeting.
And if that's something you want to see, that's something that have to go into the
Could you advance, in the model, can you advance the start date to fiscal 24-25?
Yep, we can choose whatever start date you want.
So-
Just keeping in mind, the longer we go, the bigger our hole gets because we're in a negative cash flow situation. So if we wait till year 7, we have to plug that $40 million in 3 years versus if we do it now. But yeah, we can run it whatever scenarios you would like.
That's what he wants.
I had a couple of questions. Most of our stuff goes to Billy Wright out of Gustine. So I'm just wondering, was that figured at whenever back when they figured that, was it figured as everything going to Highway 59? So it was, because it's not that much farther, you know what I mean? It's not like it's way out of the way for us.
Yeah.
We're not hauling all the way to 59.
Yeah, I think
And
that's,
so I get what they were trying to do, but the other question I have is, from what I understand, our hauler takes everything to Billy Wright, but all the organic he picks back up and takes to his composting facility. Are we paying a fee?
The fee that.
Are we paying the tonnage for that?
There is a tonnage fee for that, and what that fee is the cost of us to run the scales and to load the material for it.
Okay.
it's a
So-
smaller, it's
So it's
not
not
the
really a
tip fee.
tonnage fee,
It's a
more
per
of a service charge.
It's a per ton service. It's the
Yeah.
same thing we do at Highway 59 for the recyclables. The material comes in, there is a rate, and that cost covers our administration and for our staff to load the material onto their
Great,
their
okay.
vehicles. So
That's fair.
I have a question too. I don't know if you were done.
No, no, I'm good.
So does the authority run like a recycling facility? Because the question that I have is, let's say, I think the assumption was that there's only a small decrease in diversion as a result of this. What happens when there's a larger increase in diversion resulting in your fixed costs still remaining high, but you've got now that material going somewhere else?
Yep.
Wouldn't that result in a higher tip fee at some point for agencies if agencies begin to educate and,
Yes.
the pie in the sky stuff?
Yes, the more effective you all are in diverting your organics will result in less material coming to the landfill. There is an assumption.
We can change those. We
Yeah.
have it based on the waste characterization of each individual member agency, their capture rates based on their contracts and how much education. But historically, there's been an aversion to recycling and organics and all of that stuff from the community.
And contamination.
And
issues.
contamination, if you're starting forcing and finding people, then yeah, we're gonna get a lot more out of the landfill into the other ones. But I don't think anyone's jumping to increase rates for recycling and organics and finding people at this point. So we've been conservative.
But you are right. I mean,
But you're 100%
the more material that comes out through the diversion programs reduces the amount of material that goes into the landfill, reduces the revenue that's generated through that, municipal solid waste. But I think that's one of the assumptions. That is one of the assumptions. We assumed a rate there of diversion that we'll be watching. And in 2 or 3 years, when we're talking about importation, we'll know a little bit more. But
it's one of those things.
it's only a
we look
little
at.
complicated.
It's one of the things we look at in the 3-year, 5-year, and later down the road.
Yeah.
When we come back and go, okay, we found that there is a lot of diversion, more than anyone expected. It's affecting our service costs, and we may need to increase more.
Yeah, it's kind of,
We could run
where
other
you
scenarios.
encourage residents to, recycle, compost, whatever it is, it's ultimately going to hurt future, costs of solid waste, especially.
And the recycling organics costs are also higher than landfilling, so it creates a lot of cost pressure going forward. But we can definitely run the model. It's pretty easy to switch that to
Yeah, I just
higher
wanted to
recovery
bring
rates to
that
see
up,
what it would look like.
because, this is purely kind of the solid waste side of it, the other side of it does impact this as well.
I don't know if all the board knows that, whenever, if the landfill closes today, we gotta have a certain amount of funds, right, in case of future losses or leakages.
Yeah, it's for closure or post-closure. You have to cap it, monitor the methane, put methane recovery.
I don't know if there's a specific amount.
Yeah, it's a specific
It's-
amount.
Yeah, it's independent for each facility, and that's, Phil talked about those closure
That's
estimates
the red line right
that were
here.
done in 2009 and 2013. The state has an inflation factor that we apply to that every year. Honestly, those estimates, being that old, the inflation factor is probably not enough to give us the right number for today. So as Phil said, that's something we'll probably look at I would hope within the next 24 months, to go out and get those costs updated based on today's cost and technology. And unfortunately, they're probably not gonna go down, they're gonna go up.
Well, there's a lot of new members, that's what I want everybody to know.
You're required to fill that fund at the rate that you're filling the landfill, so if you have a $20 million liability, if you're 50% full, you need $10 million in your post-closure fund.
Yeah, and that money has to be set aside separately, and we can't touch it until we get into closure.
And we're responsible for managing that site essentially forever.
In perpetuity, yeah, so if there's some kind of remediation for pollution that gets into the storm, into the water, then ultimately you'd be responsible.
What's the overall fiscal impact of the imported trash? Is it, I mean, does that help kind of subsidize
Makes
the?
us solvent.
It does right now, and I'm glad you brought that. I wanted to go back to that for a minute, because I want to not imply that all of this is, like coming from the Bay Area or anything.
Yeah, that's your question, where exactly is it?
Yeah, we're getting waste from Jilton and Stanislaus, from Tuolumne County, from Turlock, and, honestly, Tuolumne is the second largest of the 12. We're getting over 40,000 tons a year from them. And actually, their rate's over $27 a ton. So it's not that far off from our cheapest rate.
Yeah, it's a Lord.
Yeah, so.
But for them to pay that rate plus their transportation costs, it's still cheaper than the landfills they're going to. If we start getting to the 31 to 40, it's just cheaper for them to keep it there, and we never get that revenue to help pay off the bond right now.
How do we raise do we kind of conserve both masters in terms of raising the prices to affect, but at the same time still being competitive, right? That's what you.
What these importers have been told is that we are looking at a rate increase, and that they're going to have to eat the same across the board increase that we put on the jurisdictions locally.
And that's why we had the contracts in July, because we told them, you will probably see, there's possibility you'll see a rate increase July 1, and we'll have to renegotiate the contract.
That might be an item we asked the board for approval to, is to go ahead and raise the rates on them July 1. If you're talking about putting everybody else off a year, but we can go to them and say, hey, if you want us to come here. I know we were gonna ask, or wait to see if somebody asked for it, but maybe we go to the last slide. And just, one of the things I wanna emphasize is, there aren't that many options for people in the valley to take their waste. Stanislaus has 1 active landfill. San Joaquin has 3. Fresno has 1. Madera has 1.
For those of you who can't read in the back, this is the gate rates here on all the different landfills. Merced is right here. We're at 43. The most expensive is 121. But the outlier, that 121 is an outlier, and so is the $26 rate. So, you'll be looking between $42 and $65 at the local landfills in the surrounding counties that are publicly operated. And you're in the 42, 43 range at the gate rate for other users, lower for yourselves. So you're on the lower end of the cost spectrum for the local landfills, not publicly lower rates.
If we're charging 27 or so for all of them, we're getting a deal.
They're getting a deal, well, yeah, because otherwise they would be going to perhaps San Joaquin.
The transportation costs are pretty expensive. The transfer, you're looking at, it's 20 tons and you're $150 an hour, so $750, and that's round trip, so I drive an hour to landfill. It's $15 a ton right there, not including.
We've been quoted minimum $25 a ton to transfer. So you add that on to the 20 we're adding there, so they're at 40. They're still 40 something, but they're still saving $10 a ton.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. When you're talking 40,000 tons, that's.
And these are publicly posted gate rates too. They could have, they could have disposal agreements with them or import agreements that are lower than these rates. Actually, harder to get.
Sorry.
I didn't raise it.
Sorry. I answered to hey you.
Yeah. If you're sitting next to Pedroso, no one's going to be looking at you.
Sorry.
Not looking at you.
Sorry, Director Pereira.
Hey, you leave Josh alone. He's a good guy. So a couple of thoughts. One is, like I said earlier, the household is who we represent, right? RWA, and so Kyle, I prefer that you don't use the word parity in the rates,
okay,
right? Because it's really not.
Okay.
In my opinion, it's because what people are paying, and if we wanna look at what it costs people to get there and adjust for that, I'm good with that, right, if that's the case, but anyway, that's one. The second one, and I mean, it's not 100% tied into this, but I believe it's a part of our rate, and that is our landfill gas to energy. You know, we kinda, I don't know, you know, if we're still working on that, but, you know, I've talked to our staff in economic development, and they said that they would be more than willing to sit down with you, and, you know, James, you're new, so this is great timing, right? And go through what's available, because that landfill to gas has the energy, right, the gas to electricity, and then it has the energy, the heat that's produced, and then there's one other component that I'm drawing a blank on right now, but that would be a benefit if we could get a plant of some sort to co-locate or nearby locate, right, and then they could, then all three of those items could be utilized by a manufacturer or, you know, something, whether it's food industry or otherwise. And that income would severely change our economic picture, right? Because we've got the cost of the new flare in here and the ongoing of that, you know, that would change, right? We wouldn't need it. So I don't want us to lose sight of that, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna turn it to James because he knows, he's the guy here. But I also am gonna say that I appreciate that, and I do appreciate your patience on it, because I met with the Marks. I hope I call them the Marks. But I did sit down with the Marks, and we talked through like exactly what you were talking about. And we were in the process of snagging James, so I said, give us some time, and so I conveyed to him, to James as well, and I know we're talking about our options going out in the spring as well. So anyway, go ahead, James, but thank you for reminding me that.
Unfortunately, one of the side effects of 1383 is it scared off a number of the developers because they don't know what's gonna happen if we stop putting organics in the landfill. Everything's based on typically a 20-year pro forma for them. They want to know that gas quantity and quality is going to be there for 20 years. Our environmental resource manager just last week sat on an evaluation panel for San Joaquin County. They put out exactly that, an open RFP for any type of beneficial gas use. They got 3 responses. Honestly, none of the 3 were very good. It's, you know, there aren't the tax credits. There is a potential for federal RINs, renewable credits. If that comes through, that may change the situation. You know, certainly I spent 13 years, well, close to 16 years operating landfill gas systems. Both, you know, I've been at sites when we put in gas to energy plants. Yeah, I'm going up to San Joaquin tomorrow. Their Foothill landfill has a gas to energy plant that I helped them procure back in 2005. So it's very much in my wheelhouse. Honestly, we got a lot going on right now, and I kind of told Stacy, okay, I mean, I knew of the UC Merced project, and when that fell through, we're going to get back to evaluating something to do with that gas. May not be spring, maybe late summer. We've got to get all these other projects kicked off and moving. But, you know, we'll certainly meet with Mark Erickson. I've got some, you know, curiosity about what the potential might be on Castle. You know, there are a number of options out there, but we want to play it smart and look at it and do something that's going to be, I think the word I want is long-term. I'll be honest, one of the proposals they got up in San Joaquin was from a company that wanted to use the gas to generate electricity to run a Bitcoin farm on site.
Right.
I don't know about anybody else, I'm an old guy. I'm not sure that Bitcoin is gonna last 3 to 5 years.
I don't know what a Bitcoin farm is.
Well, but the problem with the Bitcoin, right, is they generate heat. Well, they don't need the heat.
Yeah, well, they don't need the heat, they need the electricity.
Well, I know, but that's only a third of what we're gonna produce.
Right, depending on the process, yeah.
So I would suggest that instead of doing what San Joaquin did, and throwing out and seeing what sticks. I say we meet with Mark and put together a stakeholder group and go find a company and tell them how we can save them money and get them to locate here somewhere near the landfill. I mean, that's how a business would do it, right? Is you go out and find a customer for your off-fall, right? You got dairymen buying almond hulls, you got dairymen buying cottonseed, you know, that's.
Yeah, it's something we can potentially look at. Again, the problem becomes what happens when that gas peters out
Right.
20 years from now.
So then that's one of my other points or questions is if we're doing composting, can we cover our compost and capture that gas and use it in our energy program?
Not very efficiently under a generic compost pile. There's some in-vessel operations that can be done that pull off some of the gas. The difference is in the style of decomposition, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic. And if it's, aerobic with oxygen, it really generates carbon dioxide rather than methane.
And there's no use for the carbon dioxide.
No.
You
I
can't
mean, it's another greenhouse gas. It's not as bad as the methane, but it's not really.
Yeah, okay, I don't want to derail.
In order to, you really have to do a digest.
We entertained that when we did the bids, and it was about $110 a ton for organics rather than the 55 to 60 we're looking at. So even with those credits, it was much more expensive. And one of the elements of our organics RFP was looking for companies that could integrate with the gas produced at the landfill. And we didn't get any responsive bids that were
Okay.
financially.
Yeah, and then the last item would be that, even if we don't raise our rates, the 5.25% July 1st, I don't see any reason why we couldn't look at doing that with our importers if the contracts allow it. And I would, this is a great slide, right? It's very telling, it'd probably be worth taking each of our importers and see where their other options are, right? So if you're Tuolumne County, right, it's Stanislaus County, and that tipping fee is $42. So we could go to whatever it is, 30 or 32 or, something.
We also have to consider the transportation costs that they're paying to get it here.
Yeah,
So
but
that's.
Well, but they gotta transport it to wherever they take it.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, look at.
We can look at them, the hard factor of that is these are publicly posted gate rates and getting to the heart of, what are all these agreements look like?
Yeah.
Let's do public records requests and.
But
Okay, throw a number of $50 out there, Facebook. But I think the spirit of what Director Purr is saying is, I mean, the next step on the landfill gas is, we'll reach out to the marks, we'll sit down, we'll have that conversation. I wasn't able, James brings a wealth of knowledge, and we'll pick that up and go there with your input, and we'll talk about next steps, and we'll keep you in that loop, and we'll start that process again. And then I think what we'll talk about is recognizing that these are the public rates, that there might be lower rates that are negotiated and we don't necessarily have access to them, but the spirit of what you're suggesting is looking at each of them geographically specific to where they are to us and look at an increase opportunity sooner rather than later and not just a blanket rate. So taking into, so we'll take a hard look at that, but I've heard that now twice, and again, we're not making decisions, but it is an item that we can start preparing to have in place by the start of the fiscal year, is to look at, regardless of the other fees, increasing those importation agreement rates that are gonna be going into effect July 1. So I think there's a lot of meat there for us to take back and work with, so we'll report out on that. I'd really love to hear from Las Vegas and Dos Palace on kind of just thoughts.
Yeah, clearly there's a clear benefit on what we can call parity, for the city, especially, as we consider every rate increase, solid waste is not the only rate increase we're looking at. We're looking at the whole picture. We're looking at more $30-40 on every single enterprise fund that we have, just because that's the nature of the cost of business. However, I do understand the variability of the volumes that we use from a single line, just small single sets, right? When we're looking at a different rate, I see the benefit, especially to the smaller community, smaller household, but at the same time, having those rate and trying to justify that to our city residents is going to be very difficult, because it's almost seems like, bigger cities are helping subsidizing some of these costs to maintain the facilities, to keep everything running. And having to justify that to our community is going to be a pretty hard sell, I believe. And then I think having this model, having all the different studies that have in front of us would be beneficial, so that we look at all the options and see what is beneficial, not just to the funds, but for the entire county.
Yeah, and a thought on top of that, I like the idea you mentioned, going to those importers and doing the math, saying, hey, we understand this is your rate at the moment, and we can do the math and just throw a number, see what that number is, and we can say, hey, it may be marginal, and they may only have a 2 or 3% or $2 or $3 difference, and so they'll eat the cost. I'm like, sure, it goes up, but it's still cheaper to go to this, landfill versus going to another landfill. Versus we have to continue to absorb that cost of the jurisdiction, and the importers, continue to get a benefit from us. I don't know if that's the most sound benefit for the residents.
Well, and I do just want to make sure to reiterate that any adjustment that we're making to our importation, we're still trying to hit the sweet spot where we're keeping them and keeping that revenue, because the revenue the assumptions between now and 2027 assume the importation revenue. So I think we try to get more where we can there, but we also are still in that place of dependency that we need that revenue. So I think we still have a carrot, we're still trying to be, to attract them to be in partnership with us, but we won't be able, I'm gonna look to you, but we are not going to be able to increase importation to close the gap we need to fill. It's that, there still is.
And your big point is the importers, in a sense, they're not, there's two ways to look at it, right? One, they're taking advantage of us with lower rates, but two, I think, just what I'm gathering is your perspective is much more different. They're keeping us solvent, they're saving us, and we depend on them.
It's a necessity.
Yeah.
On this line, what's happening, as soon as we stop imports, the line just goes down. So we'll definitely look at that and do some sensitivity.
You have fixed costs that are going to be paid for no matter what, and they're paid for no matter if the importers are coming in or not.
Yes.
It's like, no.
Yes.
On top of that, if you stop importation suddenly at this point, you may be declared in default on your bond immediately, because they will know that you don't have enough money to make those bonds.
And our residents might not like you.
Yeah, well, I think everybody's fully understands that we've been talking, I know we got some new members, but we've been talking about, like, the reason why we're importing is because we have big bond payments. The 27, 28, we get as much as you can out of them, but don't piss them off too bad. Right?
Yeah.
Don't leave, because then we're really gonna be in trouble. But I think that but moving forward, like I said earlier, once we meet that threshold, our bond payments are paid off, I think that in the long run, our residents are gonna be better off paying a little bit more incrementally and having the volume space than importing and then running out of the volume space, and then all those people are gone, and then all of a sudden we have to do expansions. And what's that cost gonna look like to our residents? It's playing, it's unfortunate that we didn't raise the rates incrementally over time. I think as a government agency, sometimes what we do is, oh, well, because we have these other sources, we kind of let it drag on. And then what ends up happening? When we get into tough economic times, we have no other choice, and now you gotta hammer your residents with I was part of, like, one of the first things I did when I got elected to city council was have to raise everybody's utility rates. And it wasn't fun at all. Corey Pride was for her Sunstar. He asked me, what's the one thing you accomplished this year, your first year being on the city council? I said, I raised everybody's utility rates. That's the only thing we accomplished. So back to I get it, the bigger cities are probably in some way, because of the volume, subsidizing the rate a little bit for the smaller communities. But at the same time, what we gotta look at it is it takes all of us to make this thing work. If you take the little cities out of it, you're gonna absorb all the costs now. The larger jurisdictions are gonna absorb all the costs. Kind of look at it is their little incremental piles that they're putting into it is what's kind of helping. That's where you're talking about the efficiencies. They're kind of like helping you in that Tweenersville, and that's the way that I kind of look at it is we did a $14 increase per ton you know, what does that equal back to the CAM rate? I don't know. That's sometimes we talk about percentage increases and really, you know, if it's $10 and it's a 2% increase, ain't a whole lot. If it's $1,000 and it's a 2% increase, it's a lot more. So, I don't know. Dwayne, any thoughts from
Yeah,
Dos Palos?
so I mean, kind of timing for us is the big thing. We're getting ready to start a 218 process to raise our water rate. I get to be that guy. Yeah, so, but we haven't had a rate increase on the water side since 2009.
They didn't even need 218 the last time they raised it.
Right, having water. So part of that, we were gonna raise our refuse rate.
20% zero.
We haven't had an increase for anyways. Yeah. So for quite some time.
Yep.
So, the timing with this is, you know, we're now kind of looking at, well, this is gonna take effect this July. And we would kind of need those numbers fairly soon to implement that, and if we're gonna do just 218 for all of our.
Yeah.
If we're gonna kick it down the road, then, you know, a year, then maybe we need to kind of retract what we were gonna do for revenue. So it's really kind of a timing thing for us.
Okay, well, let's talk, we can talk with you too about that timing, I mean, the decision of when, but I also don't know enough about the 218 process that if there are assumptions, you can still go out and do your 218 with built-in kind of, like, as I think you mentioned, Philip, that you kind of establish the ceiling.
Yeah, you establish a ceiling, as long as you're under that,
So
you don't
you-
have to charge a maximum.
You know, we can work with you on that so that if you do need to go out, that regardless of whether it goes into effect this coming July or next July, it's still under that ceiling that you go out and
But
it.
we want to be very transparent.
Yeah.
Those things that.
Sure.
And you provide them with, you know.
You put a methodology in there explaining how exactly it is adjusted, and this is a ceiling, an example calculation. We're seeing more of a trend towards that.
Okay, okay. Well, we can talk to you too about what your actual schedule looks like and, yeah, yeah, okay.
At the risk of opening a can of worms here, the model does allow for phasing in the rates for different jurisdictions at different times
Yeah.
that creates a whole other element of,
Yeah.
Kind of a hypothetical question. We went back to that slide of what other jurisdictions charge, the one that had, yeah. So let's say, and I'm gonna pick on Dos Palos because you're close to Fresno County. So if you raise Dos Palos' price up to a certain point, whatever, $45, but yet he could take it to Fresno County and import it to there for $26.75 a ton, can he do that? Can
No.
his hauler do that?
No, there's a flow control agreement that this board loosened for diverted materials, but your municipal solid waste has to come to an RWA landfill.
Well, how are we able to import it?
They don't have the same flow control policy in other counties or jurisdictions.
Some counties, some.
Most private landfills cannot enforce flow control. Public landfills can.
And I think it probably comes from a spot of when the county decided to go to the RWA and bring member agencies as part of the board. That was the deal, like, I guess I wasn't here when they did it, but that's what's part of the deal is if we're all gonna be a part of this, you don't get an option to
Right,
sit, you
and that
have to
makes
sit
sense. I mean,
here.
it's hypothetical. Yeah. And why wouldn't other people, why wouldn't the people that are coming to us go to like Fresno County?
Transportation costs.
Transportation costs.
It's too expensive to transfer it, yeah.
Some landfills won't even allow for.
Because you would think like Mariposa County where they're $121. a ton.
And some counties won't allow them to transport in, some counties say we will not take out of county transportation.
Oh, okay.
Because their rates are so low.
Okay.
Would it be possible, Patrick, exactly, right. Is it possible to require Gustine to take everything to the Mariposa County? I'll drive the truck.
Well, you know, I'm gonna throw another thing out there.
That's the not so friendly rate right there.
Another, and this kind of goes to a little bit of the parity question, is that, you know, a lot of people from Gustine come over here and eat and shop and we leave all our garbage here. We don't take it back to Gustine. So you're paying to have that done. I mean, really, if you think about it, you know, or Los Banos or wherever.
So,
I thought you were going with, since they deposit so much of their tax money here.
That's
for
what I-
such a
that's
long
what I
time.
That's what I
No, that all goes to Turlock.
Yeah.
We all go to Wolfson.
Direct run.
Can we also look into something like where we don't have to depend on import at all? Like let's say we come to a point and say, you know what? Nobody's bringing in any import.
Like
What-
today, starting,
Well, 27.
Yeah.
you know,
We actually looked at that today, and if you have a 5.25% increase per year for 10 years, you will be financially healthy and perfectly right on those reading guidelines.
So that's the one.
Yes.
Yeah, but it would have to be over 10 years. That was a 5-year scenario. But if you rose to 5.25 for 10 years, that would put you in a situation where you do not need any.
so if you continue to.
You can still, yeah, continue until the end of the current allowable under the board. So we stopped at 27, 28 with the import, and from that point forward.
But wait, if I could, can you state what you just asked so that I can hear the whole thing, so I want to make sure we're getting to it.
So if,
Sorry.
let's say at the end of 28, when the contracts end for importation, let's say that we decide like, we're not gonna allow any more importation. What is it that we need to do, in order to be just on our own and then, but also thinking about that our landfills will last 15, 20 years longer, and then we won't have that additional cost that they were mentioning, having to build a new landfill. So it's kind of like, yeah, we're gonna get $10 now, but now it's gonna cost us 25.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd rather just go, and keep it for an extra 20 more years and save more money that way.
Have longer life by not importing, but how do we still make sure that we're parallel on our
Yes,
bottom line? And I think that's what we're.
If you go 5 more years with the 5.25% increase right here, this bottom graph's actually a 10-year and the chart's a 5-year. As soon as you can see that right here, the trend starts going down. If you continue the 5.25, those two lines would meet and have the same slope. So you'd be, in my definition of perfect financial health, assuming these, all these other variables hold true and there's no other changes.
But that's only for 10 years.
That's that is 5.25% increase, rate increase every year for 10 years.
Okay.
And stopping importation in 2028.
And obviously you want to check in every
In 10 years.
So yeah, that would be what you were
That's
asking.
perfect financial.
But we'd have to carry that 5.25 out for the entire 10 years.
And then in 10 years, some
And
different.
at that point, you wouldn't have to continue or raising the rates, assuming all the variables hold true. So you want to look at it every 3 or 5 years at some increment to see what's changed.
Because in the long run, it will cost each resident more because we got a bigger expense coming up versus a little bit.
And if we set the chart out for the 10 years and then 7 years from now, there's some issue and the board says, hey, we don't want to raise rates on our residents.
Okay.
Then we could look to see, do we want to import for another year? We can make those adjustments and try and find another way to get it. We still need to get that money, but is it going to be through a rate increase and import, or hold it off a year and do a higher rate increase the next year? Those are things we'll come back to the board to ask how we make those adjustments later on.
I think a demonstration of what that could potentially look like is we get to the point where we're no longer importing, we have these increases in place, but if the future board decides, we don't want to continue to increase our rates. We're not dependent on importation, but we were successful in expanding the Billy Wright landfill, and we have another 100 acres. 200 acres, I don't know what that looks like. So now we have another 50, 75, 100 years, I don't know what that would look like, but well beyond our lifetime to where capacity isn't a concern. Well, now you could say, well, maybe we don't do the increase, but we have a whole lot of lifespan now out at Billy Wright. Let's import again at some point at whatever rate the board finds, but to do that in lieu of a rate increase. So you have like tools, but there's so many ifs there, what that expansion looks like, and will the market support it? I mean, but that's the kind of thing that we can't necessarily plan for, but we can see as a potential that could be a future way to offset additional increases. And that's essentially what we're doing now, and what we've been doing for the last 10 or 12, when did we start importing? 14, I think, when I started. So almost 10 years, we've been saying, well, we're not gonna increase rates to our residents, but we're gonna take the importation, recognizing it still is kind of eating the airspace faster than what we wanna spend. But now if we can expand, so there's just a lot of factors involved, but I understand it's trying to see how to get to the financial health that we wanna be without importing and also taking advantage of the additional airspace.
What sort of general, is there anything based on your analysis, any like general, on this topic, right? Any sort of general truths or themes that you can glean, if I'm making sense? Like, if just the balance between obviously importing, running a facility that requires more, eating up the airspace, and then at the same time, I'll bet that's partly paying for it versus, a scaled down version which lasts a lot longer. Is there what sort of projections, or is it kind of what Stacy said, where it's all just too many ifs and too many?
There's a lot of ifs around the expansion of the landfill. It's gonna come down to airborne, waterborne, counter-cycle permitting, and whether or not we can get the land adjacent to the landfill, which has been discussed for a long time. So that's really gonna determine how long you can extend the life of your landfill. But assuming there's no expansion of your landfill and you can't get the land, or you can't start building out further, then the case studies show you don't want to eat up all your airspace. That's why people like the Bay and LA who are importing, much further, paying much higher rates than you are. Los Angeles is a great example. They closed Point of Hills. That wasn't the volume thing. They set an ordinance to close it because of environmental factors. But when it closed, every city got a rate increase request from the haulers because they had to transport it out to San Bernardino or up north to Ventura. So obviously, if you're trucking it an extra 2 hours, 3 hours each way, that's going to add significant cost to your disposal.
Some of those other counties, I would say, we ban import from LA County.
Or we get paid off of it.
Yes, or we make money and we let them pay our bills.
That's why I'm saying, once we hit 27, 28, we're in a whole different boat, because at that point, we can import if we want to, not because we have to. If we want to, then it's, if you're gonna take up space, you're gonna pay for it.
We can set the rates at the gateway or higher.
Oh, higher than the gateway.
And they can decide if they want to bring it to us.
Beverly Hills comes, if you want to take $500.
We're 50, they're 100. Otherwise,
Kern County takes a lot
send
of.
it somewhere else.
That's part of the reason for the timing why we're in front of you today, because if you don't do anything in the interim until 27, 28, you're gonna be faced with a really high rate increase in this area. This is around 27, 28, you're gonna be well below. So to make this trend line trend up, you're gonna be in a hole from where you should be from your reserve target, and it's gonna be much more than the increase you're seeing today.
Can you show kind of for folks in the back, like kind of where our current fiscal year is? We're in 23,
Current fiscal year is this big dip you see right here.
Yeah. So you can see, like, while this might feel like, oh my gosh, this is all you see the trend coming, and we're trying to get that in place.
So the big drop is because we spent a lot of money on capital.
It's because we have to build out the cells and close the old cells because of the import, and then we have to start buying a lot more fleet and equipment and capital.
To get our
expenses.
agency back to a solvent from the problems we had before, a lot of things have been diverted. A lot of capital and projects and things have been diverted.
I don't feel like we've been diverted. We've been spending money on equipment all through this deal, man.
But I mean, we've also had to, over multiple fiscal years, put capital project funding away to build up to be able to deliver the projects, which is where we are now. So it's, plus what we've deferred, and then just the cost increases. I mean, I learned the term yellow iron, which I talked to my kid and he's like, oh, that's gold. And I'm like, no, that's not gold. So I told you I was gonna come down to mining something. But the cost of the equipment we bought, I mean, the projects that had to be deferred are much more expensive today than they would have been if they had been done when we didn't have the resources necessarily to do. But the cost of just our normal capital projects, like replacement of equipment, I mean, I think it was one of you were telling me about was it the dozer or the compactor or something the compactor that we bought the last time we bought it to then and now is almost
It's about 40 to 50% increase over 4 years.
Yeah, so that's, while we were stocking money away to do these projects, we weren't even keeping up with the pace of what the cost increases that were incurred. And you all, I mean, this is we're in no different of a situation than you all are facing in your, at your local level with your project. So are there, I see folks, I mean, this has been an excellent discussion. It's 6:50. We've got a lot of takeaway to kind of come back around. We will kind of, I think the next step, so the next, I put it in an email, it's probably buried in there, but if it's not on your radar, I'll send out a reminder. We typically do a homeless and housing and homelessness pre-meeting at 2:30 on before. We're gonna move that out a month and do a 1 hour right before, and we're gonna basically bring the update to this. My apologies for not having printouts, that was just a complete, like, my brain it just wasn't there. And as soon as I saw, and we sat here, and as soon as I saw it on there, I knew, and I couldn't even look at you guys, because I was like, oh my gosh, we should have had these printed, so that's my apology. We'll get some material out, we'll make sure we have those copies. I'll send the notice on the next workshop, which will be an hour. We'll pick up from where we left off. And we will also talk about potentially having a board item on to address, get your official direction on increasing the importation rate starting the next fiscal year. That seems to be, I don't say low-hanging fruit, but there seems to be consensus there, so we'll start that process. And we'll follow, make sure that we're doing the best we can to help you guys so that you're not stuck either delaying too late or having to do this twice, which no one would want to do. Okay? Any questions or anything else for me? All right, thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair.